Hello everyone and welcome to this latest episode of Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark. I hope you're all doing very well. It's 10:30 in the morning here in the Czech Republic and I've got the light on, my desk light, because it's dark and miserable and it's cold. It's really cold. It's around -9 I think, according to my telephone. So anyway, I've got a tag video for you today. I was tagged last night in a new tag made by Faith from Faith&Books, and it's a tag that she made in honor of the passing of the late great actor Sidney Poitier, from Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and In the Heat of the Night, as well as others. She's a big fan. I'm not a super fan, but I did certainly enjoy the two films I mentioned, and I thought he was a great actor and somebody who achieved a lot despite the odds, especially in the earlier part of his career. And he passed away yesterday, or was it Thursday, at the age of 94. So she's made this tag, and it's all about memoir. She hasn't actually given it a name, so I don't really know what to call it. I think I might just call it the Sidney Poitier Memoir Memorial Tag, perhaps. But it's literally listing your top 10 memoirs. Now she does define it. She does define memoir in her original video, which I will leave a link to below. And it's supposed to be the top 10 memoirs that left you feeling like you wanted to be friends with the author after reading them. Now, I actually struggled a little bit, Faith, I apologize, with coming up with 10 that fit that bill. Instead, I just kind of went for some memoir / autobiographies that I found really interesting to read. But I certainly don't want to be friends with all of them, but some of them definitely. And yes, I have included some autobiographies because I'm sure I've read more memoir, but my memory is pretty poor these days. And looking back through my Goodreads, which I've only been on, I think, for maybe 4 years, the extent of memoir on there isn't that impressive. So definitely a lot of biographies, some autobiographies, and a couple of memoir. But so I just kind of listed it. It's not in specific order, and I'll tell you about it as we go on. So here are the 10 that I've chosen because I found them to be interesting. So let's start. The first one I really enjoyed, and I would love to be friends with the author if he was still alive, was My Life and Times by Jerome. And once again, on this channel, those of you who watch it regularly will know Jerome and my particular fondness for his book, Three Men in a Boat. However, his own memoir / autobiography is really wonderful as well, because not only does he display wonderful comic turns and things like that within the book, but he literally discusses his life and times and his difficult childhood, as well as what's happening during the course of his life. There's a fantastic chapter where he talks about advances in technology and funny experiences of watching people riding bicycles for the first time and all sorts of different things. And I just think he's a very interesting man. He traveled to the United States. He lectured, I can't remember, I think it was somewhere maybe in Kentucky, not long after there was a lynching of 1 or 2 black men, and he spoke out really strongly against that. And he just seems to me to be a really engaging, kind, and nice person who I think I would be honored to call a friend, to be honest. Right, so that's My Life and Times by Jerome. I'm not sure, I don't know if we would actually get on for number 2, but he would certainly be somebody I'd like to know and would be very interesting at dinner parties. I've mentioned his autobiography a few times on this channel as well, and that's the book A Happy Odyssey by General Sir Adriand Carton de Wiart, who, if you don't know him, you really should. He has one of the greatest Wikipedia introductions to his Wikipedia entry of all time. He was a British general during the Second World War. He joined the British Army at the very end of the 19th century, and he was, I don't even know how to say it really. He lived for war and the army, and he just had this, I don't want to say death wish, because I don't think he ever wanted to die, of course, but he just seemed completely unafraid of anything. And he went through a huge amount of injuries in his life. He lost an eye, he lost an arm, and it didn't keep him out. He didn't leave the army because of this. He carried on. He rose to the rank of general during the Second World War. He survived 2 plane crashes. He escaped from a prisoner of war camp and wandered around the Italian countryside without speaking a word of Italian, but also sticking out like a sore thumb because he had one arm and a patch over his eye. And, he won, for example, Britain's highest military medal, the Victoria Cross, and he doesn't even mention it at all in his memoir. He doesn't mention it at all in his autobiography. Instead, that's mentioned by Churchill in the introduction. So I think it's a fantastic read, not certainly for its literary merit, it's quite simply written, but just to see this kind of, we use the expression they don't make them like that anymore, and in his case that certainly is true. Next I will go with a really enjoyable memoir by a reporter, actually a British reporter called Angus Roxburgh, and it's Moscow Calling is the name of the memoir, and it's basically recounting his time as a foreign correspondent at the end of towards the end of the communist era through into modern Russia, and his relationship with Russia and the Russians, and that's a very enjoyable read and really, really interesting. And it puts me in mind as well of one I didn't write down, but it's definitely also a memoir that you should read, which is The File by Timothy Garton Ash, where he recounts his time as a student in East Germany, in East Berlin, and he goes back after the fall of the Berlin Wall to look at his Stasi file, the file the secret police held on him, and to track down those people who had been informing on him and kind of confront them to find out their motivations. But going back to Moscow Calling by Angus Roxburgh, it's a really interesting read about a turbulent and changing time and his experience of that. Next, I will mention a book with a man I don't think I'd want to be friends with, but it was a really interesting memoir, and that's The Reluctant Communist by Charles Robert Jenkins. Now, I don't know if any of you remember him. It would have been towards the beginning of this century, I think around 2004, 2005. Charles Jenkins was an American serviceman who was stationed in South Korea during the 1960s, if I remember rightly, and he crossed the DMZ and defected to North Korea. And this is his story, pretty much about his life living in North Korea. And he became, obviously a teacher, I think an English teacher. He got involved in films as well, because there was a small community of Western Europeans / Americans who were living there, who had also defected, and they would usually be called upon to play the part of, satanic Americans in North Korean war films. And yeah, just the way he describes his life there, his relationships there. He gets married, he has a family, and also his eventual, I don't know if it's a spoiler alert or not, but I suppose as you know that he wrote the memoir and it's available, that he obviously didn't end his life in North Korea. So that's, as I say, I'm not sure I would want to be his friend because he is quite a strange person, but certainly the memoir itself was really, really interesting. Next, someone I would love to be friends with, and that's Eric Newby, who you might know from his book A Short Walk in the Hindu Kush. But he wrote, it's interesting with a lot of travel writing because I think to some extent they're all, or very often, a form of memoir. So I could have picked perhaps just A Short Walk in the Hindu Kush, but I've gone instead for his autobiography because Eric Newby was a really prolific traveller who had a very fascinating life as well, and he talks about that. It's kind of a collection of reminiscences throughout his life and his travels, and part of which have been used in his other books. But he talks about the kind of really beautiful love story that led to his meeting his wife, because he was a commando in the Second World War, and his wife's family basically hid him from the Nazis when he was in Italy, and he went back after the war and married her. So it's lovely. But he just seems a really fascinating person who had a very full and long life. Next, again, another book I've mentioned here on this channel is Travels with Herodotus by Ryszard Kapucinski, Polish journalist and writer, who basically in this book he talks about his relationship with the histories by Herodotus and his travels with them, because he's a foreign correspondent, which was unusual in those days. He starts his career during the 1950s, and he starts off in India and travels to various locations, each time accompanied by this book, The Histories by Herodotus. And it's a really wonderful and interesting book. And yes, Kapucinski is somebody I would be, again, thrilled to count among my friends and comrades. Next is another really interesting one. I have to apologize, by the way. They all seem to be men, bar one. I've read a lot of biographies of women. I would love to have talked about, for example, The Girl in the Picture by Denise Chong, which is a biography about I can't remember her name, unfortunately, but the famous picture of the girl from the Vietnam War who's running naked after being burned by napalm. That's a really interesting book. I would love to have talked about one of my favourite old-time actresses, Margaret Rutherford, and a really nice biography of hers I read not that long ago, as well as The Divine Feud, which is a kind of a dual biography of Joan Crawford and Betty Davis, as well as many other women. But it seems I haven't at least got recent reads of female memoirs. So why not suggest some in the comments below, and I can remedy my rather one-sided gender bias when it comes to memoir. So please educate me. Thank you. Number 7. Next Stop, Execution by Oleg Gordievsky. And Oleg Gordievsky is one of the highest-ranking KGB agents to defect to the West. He defected to Britain in the 1980s, and again, it's a really fantastic autobiography / memoir, because he reflects a lot on the his motivations and reasons for doing the things he does, and living the life of, a double agent. And I think he would have been. I think he's dead. Yeah, is he dead? Actually, I don't know. Hang on a second. So my big apologies to Mr. Gordievsky. He's not dead. Thank you, Google, for remedying the situation. He's 83 years old and thankfully is still with us. So perhaps we have the opportunity to still be friends. So although I'm not sure how we would meet in this current situation, given that he's living in London and I'm here in the Czech Republic, I guess behind the Iron Curtain and his old stomping ground. So, but yeah, it's definitely a book I enjoyed, and I found him a really interesting character who, I would share a shot of vodka with for sure. Next, yes, the one female memoir I have on the list, and the worst thing is I don't even know who wrote it because it's anonymous. Although Goodreads did attribute it to Marta Hillers, but I'm sure that it's still anonymous unless it's recently been revealed who wrote it, and that's the memoir A Woman in Berlin, which is basically a diary that recounts the horrific situation that women in East Germany, which would become East Germany, and Berlin went through with the with the advance of the Red Army, and from Soviet soldiers due to rapings and violence and this kind of thing. And she's a remarkable, strong woman who writes this book because she experiences horrific things, but she really maintains this kind of composure and philosophical outlook on things, and it's well worth your time. So yeah, check it out, A Woman in Berlin. Next would be one I read recently, and it was a bit of fun really, and it's called Gotta Get Theroux This, and it's by Louis Theroux. If you don't know him, Louis Theroux is the son of Paul Theroux, the famous travel writer, and he's the cousin of the American actor Justin Theroux. And what Louis Theroux is, he's well known as a kind of, offbeat journalist, presenter in the UK. He holds dual citizenship with the United States because of his father, but he was brought up mostly in England, and he sounds every inch the Englishman. He's made documentaries on Scientology. He's done he did this series called Weird Weekends, where he kind of dived into the dark depths of American subculture and things like that, which was very interesting. And his autobiography is no less interesting, really. And I quite like him, and I would certainly be happy to be friends with him for sure. And there were a couple more that I wanted to mention. I mean, one that I wanted to put on there is The Moon's a Balloon by David Niven. I think that's a wonderful autobiography / memoir, because I do think they can fill multiple categories. There can be a lot of memoir within autobiographies, so they can kind of recount chronological or whatever form of life story, and within that certain anecdotes and things which I think would fit the definition of memoir. But I decided not to in this case because I wanted to fit one more in and keep it to 10, and it's because it's one that I was reminded of recently because of the Reading Africa readathon. I never know which is the right word for it, and I should do, seeing as I organised it. The Reading Africa readathon, which is Ishmael Beah's A Long Way Gone, which is a memoir of a child soldier, and it recounts Ishmael's time during the civil wars in Sierra Leone, and his becoming a child soldier and the horrific conditions and things that he was exposed to, as well as his process of kind of coming out of it and getting his life back. So he's somebody I would certainly be happy to be friendly with, because I admire the fact that he can go through something so horrendous and incomprehensible and still be able to make, a life for himself afterwards. So there we go. So that is the Sidney Poitier memoir memorial tag created by Faith&Books, and I will tag a couple of people because I think it's a lovely tag to be able to list 10 memoirs of people you would, if you want to, of course you should stick by Faith's thing if you are able to, but I'm sure she'll understand if you're in a situation like me where you necessarily don't want to be friends with all of them, and that the definition of memoir can be a little bit loose to fill the numbers. I'm sure she won't mind, but I'm also sure that the people I'm about to tag probably could come up with a better, more definitive list than I did, and that of course would be Steve Donoghue, Marc Nash, Brian at Bookish, Mark Richardson at Richardson Reads, A Very Literary Carrie, and Shelley Swearingen. So there we go. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend and look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye bye.